Alright, so thanks for coming out again tonight, guys. Really appreciate it. Got a good group out here. Hope you all enjoyed last week's discussion. I know I did for sure. This week we're going to be going from the moral argument now to the cosmological argument for God. So this one we're taking a slightly different approach on. We're going to walk through all the possibilities of how the universe could have been created in theory. And we're going to look at the strengths, look at the weaknesses, and then go from there. So here we go. So we've got everything possible. We've got non-theist explanation and theist explanation. There are two different types of cosmological arguments. I believe Thomas Aquinas wrote a different one that is a little more involved, we'll say. This one is a little bit simpler, and I think it is a little bit more, well, first it's easier to understand, and I think it's a little bit easier to defend than the other one. I think they both have good merits to them, but this one I prefer. It works best for me, and I think it's a little bit, again, easier to explain. So I want to take a second just to talk about it, why I'm doing this series. So I know a lot of times as Christians, we get caught up when someone asks us why we're Christians. And we say, well, I grew up in a Christian household, my parents were Christians, and so I just became a Christian. That's not really the why behind it, that's the how, if you will. And I want to help us to understand why we're Christians. So for me, the Kalam Cosmological Argument has been really foundational for me because I do struggle at times, more from a feeling perspective of whether God is real. I have to remind myself, and I actually go through this thought process, okay, how do we know God is real? Because to me, I could be driving on any given day, and it's just like, is God real? Is he not? I don't know. Like, I can't see him in the sky. He didn't say, hey, Lance, I'm real. Like, to a certain extent, you could just deny that God exists. But this helps remind me there is a reason why we believe that God is real. And if God is real, then I feel compelled, at least, to find out who he is and what he has planned for me. So when people ask me, why are you a Christian? I give them what you can use is this acronym here. So I usually go with OMMD: origin, morality, meaning, and destiny. But if you want to do it with DOM, just to make it easier to remember, you can do it that way as well. So origin, where did we come from? We have to answer that question for the beginning part of our worldview. Morality, where do we get our objective morality, if there is objective morality? Meaning, what is the meaning for our life? What purpose do we have? And destiny, where are we going after this life? Every worldview, doesn't matter if it's religious or not, it has to answer these four questions to have a cohesive and coherent worldview to live by. And so I use this as my rubrics for deciding if Christianity is true. Christianity, well, I haven't studied every possible religion out there. There's three main categories for religion. There's atheists, that's agnostics, and then there's polytheists, which believes in multiple gods, and then there's theists. So Jews, Christians, Catholics, Islam, all those get wrapped up in theism. So all the ones that are theists would fall under the Kalam Cosmological Argument as far as what supports their beliefs. Hopefully that gives you an idea again why I'm doing this series and gives you some kind of background. Again, for me, this is the biggest argument that I've leaned on personally as far as explaining what I believe. I'd really like it if, for you guys, you pick a topic of the three that really most appeals to you and do your own study on that, and hopefully that helps you to have conversations with other people in your life and be like, this is the reason why I believe in Christianity. That's my hope, and I'll explain more as we go along. Alright, so what are the possible explanations for why we have a universe to begin with? Well, you could say either the universe has always existed, never had a beginning, so that could solve who started it, if that's true. We could say the universe is not eternal, but it actually created itself. So Stephen Hawking was a big proponent of this, and we'll talk about that more later. And then we go with what the Kalam Cosmological Argument says, which is the universe is not eternal and didn't create itself, but rather was created by a superior non-physical being. So let's dive into that. All right, so before we start going through different theories, I want to go over 3 major scientific/logic principles, just so we understand why things work the way they do. So we're going to talk about the first law of thermodynamics. I have the technical definition up there, but really this is what I tend to try to remember is the bolded stuff. It's a little bit simpler for me. Really just says energy can be neither created nor destroyed inside of the system/universe. No new energy is being added to our universe. So we are in a closed-off system. There is no new energy or matter being added into the system. Everything is just being reorganized, if you think about it that way. So we have the example here in the picture. We have light. It's turned into chemical energy. Chemical energy gets put in some sort of food, and then that eventually becomes kinetic energy. So if people eat food, they get energy from that. Eventually they burn off some heat, and then that energy is no longer usable energy in theory. And so in that process, energy is slowly going away. But that's the first law of thermodynamics. No new energy is being added to the system. So everything we have now is all that we have. And that'll come into play here in a little bit. Second law of thermodynamics. Again, the bolded is what I tend to try and remember versus the technical definition on that one. So we have the quality of matter/energy deteriorates gradually over time. So how I like to think about it, I think I would have remembered better in high school if my teacher taught it this way, but you have your bedroom. Clean it up whatever day you normally do your cleaning, but then throughout the week it gets worse and worse, to the point that you have to clean it up again. So that's what energy is like. It slowly deteriorates over time. Eventually, usable energy turns into unusable energy. So in theory, if you go out long enough, we'll eventually run out of energy, usable energy. It'll all be unusable. That would take an extremely long time. Would never even happen in a million years. It would take much longer than that. But in theory, yeah, in theory, it would take an extremely long time. But that is the way that energy works. You don't somehow create more energy. It's always becoming less and less usable, but we will only have the same amount. Any questions on those 2? I know those are very technical, but you'll see how we use it here in a little bit. All right, move on to the next one here. All right, so this is an interesting story. I didn't find out till after college almost. Albert Einstein and Edwin Hubble, they got to know each other back in the early 20th century. Before that, Einstein had actually been working on the beginning of the universe. He was trying to figure out some sort of mathematical equation that he could figure out what created the universe, or how has it always been. And so at the time, they had what's called the steady state theory. And that was the thought that the universe had always existed as it did. It was in the same place, wasn't moving, had always been there, just had never had a beginning. Which now we know a lot more than what they did back then, because they still did not have great astronomical places to look through, so they didn't have major telescopes. All of that was under construction, basically, or it came around after he originally did his theory. So there wasn't a whole lot of ways to test it at the time. But what he did was, while Einstein was doing his calculations, he realized that they were starting to move towards a beginning of the universe, as if things were like moving in on itself to where it had a beginning point. Well, he wasn't a really big fan of that, and so he did something that was a little bit unusual. He divided by 0 to make it. Yeah, so he divided by 0 to make it appear that it had always existed, forever into the past. So it worked at the time. People assumed it was right, and they liked at least how it went. Again, steady state theory was the dominant theory at that time. But then along comes Edwin Hubble. He actually makes a discovery. So, many of you might know Edwin Hubble from the Hubble telescope, which was named after him. He was a huge pioneer in astronomy back in the day. Did a whole lot of work, helped establish a lot of things. But a big discovery he made, and you'll see him in the middle there of that picture, is that he discovered the Doppler effect, or at least he found it in practice. So, for those of you who aren't familiar with the Doppler effect, it's basically how light waves are affected with movement. So if you think about it, when a fire truck is coming down the road and it's coming towards you, you tend to not hear it the same way as when it's already coming past you and it's behind you. Because those sound waves are getting bent. As it's moving, it's pushed more towards the vehicle, whereas when it's moving away from you, it's spread out more. So that's why you hear a different sound almost when it's coming towards you versus when it's leaving. Same principle works with light as well. When light moves closer towards you, there tends to be a bluish discoloration to whatever you're looking at. Whereas if something's moving away from you, there tends to be a red coloration towards whatever you're looking at. And what Edwin Hubble realized was that what he was looking at was most of the stars were having this red shift. And what that told him was that they were all moving away. Now, if you're in a steady state, that goes against the whole idea of it, because everything has to be stable, it has to be in the same place, not moving relative to each other. But Hubble realized this big discovery, and Albert Einstein actually came to his observatory and observed this effect, and came out very quickly afterwards and said he had made a mistake. His calculations were incorrect, and he later admitted on in his life it was the biggest blunder he'd ever made as far as his calculations go. So really, Albert Einstein had to change his whole theory on how the universe began, and he admitted that it should have a beginning point. So that was a fun story that I found out when I did my research on this. So, any questions on that?
Wasn't Einstein Jewish?
By birth, he was Jewish. I don't believe he was a practicing Jew. It's unclear if he was a theist or not on that one. At times it seems like he was, and then we're not sure. So, anyway, he did not ever claim to be a Christian, I don't think, but he did some really good work from a scientific perspective. We kind of talked about this a little bit already, but the fact that we can observe the universe helps us to test our theories. It can show us that the universe is actually expanding more than we thought. It's expanding, it's going faster as it expands even. So we are slowly getting farther and farther away from all the other stars, all the other galaxies, and things like that. But because of that, we can test it, and we can see one other thing. We're not seeing any new matter or any new energy entering into space. In theory, there is a center point to the universe, and we're not seeing anything new come out of there, kind of thing. So that's just one factor when we're thinking about how this universe is observable, how we can test our different theories on how the universe began. So here we go. Okay. So infinity is a very interesting concept. I'm sure Lauren can probably attest to this, that you can get some weird math when you start doing infinity, as far as doing calculations and stuff. Let's think about this for a second. By definition, infinity doesn't have an endpoint. It took me a while to, when I was first learning this, to think through this. But it is by definitionally impossible for the universe to exist into infinity into the past. Now, that's because we are at today. Today is the endpoint of infinity, if you think about it. Again, that took me a while to kind of wrap my mind around that. But you cannot have an endpoint to infinity. If we have reached today, and today is the end of infinity, it is not infinity by definition. Go ahead.
Why would today be considered the end of infinity? There's always going to be a tomorrow.
There is going to be a tomorrow, but you can't cap infinity in that this very moment is the end of infinity. Does that make sense?
And then the next moment is the next endpoint.
So you are, if you think about it this way, so
Wait, hold on.
Matt.
Question. Or you're saying it's the end to a past infinity?
Like time is rolling forward, and this moment in time, there's an
Is
infinite
the
going
edge of
backwards.
infinity.
Right, that's the question I'm asking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And in a steady state, that would be true, but if we're not necessarily believing in a steady state, I don't know that that would be true.
So maybe it might work better if I say it this way. You cannot add to infinity, right? I'll ask Lauren here. Would you agree with that statement?
I don't want to be the rest
You
of
don't,
the
Yeah.
okay. We'll leave Lauren alone then. But by definition, you can never add to infinity because infinity is everything. Like you can never make infinity more because it is more than everything. There is no adding to infinity.
I hate to be that guy,
Okay.
but
Go
I'm
for
going to
it.
be that guy.
All right.
There are larger infinities than infinity.
There are larger infinities than infinity.
So I won't necessarily agree with this, but everything else up until this point, I'm 100% on board with.
Okay.
That statement, I don't know that I agree with.
All
There's
right.
different kinds of infinity.
There's
Yeah,
different
can you
kinds
talk
of-
about
Wait,
that?
Right,
Yeah.
but
There's different flavors of infinity?
yes.
Yeah.
What are they called?
Not this
Infinity
one.
squared.
Yeah.
It depends on how you count it.
infinity.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
like some
there's-
infinities are bigger than others because like when you wind them up and you try to like for instance if you have an infinite number of like integers, you're just counting 1, 2, 3.
Yes.
That is smaller than if you have like
An infinite number, 1.1,
Yeah, like
1.2.
there's a different type of infinity that you kind of like line them up and count like there's an infinite number of between 1 and 2, between 0 and 1 there's an infinite number that's
Yeah.
different than if you just count infinity. Like it's
Yeah.
yeah.
And so I don't know that I agree with that one, but I do agree that even the mathematical models agree that there is an end to our universe. So I would agree on that standpoint. Also, the other counterpoint, or not the counterpoint, but another argument against today being the end of an infinity is if we are calling time a direction, then like on an axis, then today is just a point in that axis of
It's
the infinity of time of the universe.
Why?
So
I took a physics class, so it's a little bit debatable depending
Yeah.
on whether or not you believe in Newton or not, but
Yeah.
I'll buy into that.
Yeah.
I would say for time, like if it hasn't happened, you can't say that it's
Going to?
yeah, you can't count that, I would say, because for one thing, it hasn't happened, and I understand you're saying like on a grand scale, we'd just be on one point of infinity, but that is, physically, that's not the case, I would argue, in that,
I would also agree that it is not physically the case.
Yeah.
Even our mathematical and scientific models project that there is an end to the universe.
right,
This is something you and I have discussed before. So like I do agree that there is an end to the universe. Even just from a completely scientific standpoint, I also believe in the theological end to this universe. Yeah. So I don't know. Might not be worth deliberating further on this one because there's just a lot of technicalities in this one.
there is, yeah, you can go way deeper than what I'm going on here.
Yeah.
We may have to talk more later
Yeah.
on that one.
Mm-hmm.
For now, I will say it is definitionally impossible to add on to infinity,
Okay.
because that's not infinity at that point. So you end up, so what I'm saying here is every day is adding on to infinity in theory, if you want to try and go with that steady state theory or just that the universe has always existed.
That I agree with.
So that's my thought here is that you're adding by every day is adding on to infinity, which by definition makes it not infinity.
Right.
So it means that there had to be some beginning at some point. Also, just kind of an example of get weird math when you start trying to talk about infinity, especially when it comes to like physical properties. So, give an example. Let's say you have an infinity number of toothpicks. So let's say I want to move them. So I'm going to take, for every 10 toothpicks, I'm going to take one away from infinity. How for those toothpicks that I've taken away, how many toothpicks do I have? There you go. You've just created two infinities somehow. So when you come to physical properties, I would strongly argue that you cannot have an infinite number of anything. So I know that's a lot to take in there on that one, but I would argue that anything that's physical, you cannot have an infinite number of, and days are physical. So another thought on that one. Do I need to clear that up more?
No, I feel like I'm good.
Okay.
Just do what I do and stare at Buzz Lightyear, you smile. You know, you don't have to think about anything. It's,
Yeah. So,
More of an existential crisis.
yeah, just choosing to.
I hope I didn't give y'all an existential crisis going through this one. It's gonna get
It's okay,
better.
it's a comfy.
Yeah, it's gonna get even more existential. Let's go.
Right.
Multiverse.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. So, again, we've been kind of leading up to this, so you kind of get the idea, but why can't the universe have always existed? Again, mathematically, it doesn't make sense. You can't have an infinite number and then keep adding to it over and over. So by definition, it can't have existed forever into the past. And then another example, do I have a flashlight over that table, Megan?
I can pull it up on my phone.
Here.
Heck yeah.
Anyway,
There you go.
okay, so if you think about it, you've got a flashlight. A flashlight has battery. It can only last a certain amount of time. It has so much energy in it, and then it's going to be used up. Now, our sun has the same concept. It's a much different battery, and it has way more capabilities, but it's still the same thought process. It will eventually run out because it has a limited amount of energy stored into it. Now, if the universe had lasted for infinity, the sun would have already burned out. It's the exact same as a flashlight. You leave a flashlight on, it's eventually going to burn out. And if we had gone through an infinite number of days, the sun would have already burned out before we got to today. So, again, that's hard to wrap your mind around a little bit, but it's a little bit easier for me than the infinity number thing. But
And that one is actually backed up by his first and second law of thermodynamics that he's talking about. Like, these are actually scientific things. Like, there can't be an eternally, in the backwards direction, an eternally existing universe, because all of the matter would have, or all of the energy would have dissipated to be nothing and be not usable.
yeah, so that's what would happen. If we did have some sort of infinite task regression, there would be no usable energy at all. What Matthew said there is, there would be no existence at all. And then never could have made it to today, even because today is the end of infinity. But if we somehow had, there would be no usable energy left for us to use. We couldn't exist, and there would be no humans alive. Another thing to think about, if we ignored all that, we still have the problem of the universe is expanding. And if the universe has been expanded for infinity, we could not see any stars whatsoever, no matter how powerful your telescope is. Because you've had infinity to expand away from everything else. Everything is going all different directions. And so maybe one or two stars are getting closer to us somehow, but they're all going outward for the most part. And there would be nothing in the sky for you to look out outside of our solar system, which has a gravitational force on it. Everything else would just be a black sky, because everything is moving for so long, it would eventually move away from all of us. So then we mentioned first and second law of thermodynamics. Because everything is moving away from us, but we still have stars, the only other explanation would be, well, maybe there's new energy, new matter coming into the universe behind us, and that's somehow we see stars. But again, we have the first law, thermodynamics. No energy, no matter is being, new matter, that is being put into the universe. So there is nothing spurting out from some hole somewhere that we could see, oh, here's where stars are coming from. So we're in a closed system, but we can still see stars. The fact that we can see stars would tell us that there's no infinite regression. But there are some that argue against this. Let's see here. There's a flashlight. So some people were like, okay. Yeah, some people were like, well, okay, that math stuff's really weird. I don't care about that. We'll say we can have an infinite regression backwards. We don't care about that. But what really bothers me is the fact that there should be no stars if we have an infinite regression. They're like, I want to get around that somehow. So they come up with what I call the accordion universe. So this idea is like an accordion, it comes out, it makes a noise, and then goes back in, and makes a noise again. And that's what they're arguing for the universe is doing. The universe is somehow expanding out, getting really big, and we're in an expansion period right now. But eventually it'll come back in on itself. And then it has been doing this for an infinite regression backwards. So it'll come out, and then it'll come back in, and then something will push it back out. It just keeps going back and forth over and over. So this is how they get around the idea of that stars are able to be seen. It's really just a matter of the universe is expanding and compressing over and over. But you still, even if you ignore the first and second law of thermodynamics, you still have a couple of issues. One of those is that for most of the universe is simply absent of any matter that would have any type of gravitational force or whatever kind of force you want to call it, really. So it's just empty vacuum space, and we have no faint idea of even what might be strong enough to pull the universe in on itself. So there is no force or energy like known or even have an inkling of what it would be that can pull in the universe to stop from expanding currently. And then aside from that, even if you did find some sort of force, they're like, okay, there's this secret gravitational force we have no way of measuring right now, and it's pulling everything in, pulling the entire universe in. We have no clue what possible force could stop the compacting of the universe and keeping it from like sucking in on itself and making it expand back out. So while this is a nice idea of thinking of expanding and then contracting again, there are no forces that are even physically possible of doing that. There's just nothing in science that we can even point to say this might possibly cause the universe to expand and contract like that.
Didn't you mention before that there's a quote-unquote center of the universe?
There is believed to be a center of the universe, yes.
That's what I was gonna ask, like, how is it determined? It's not some sort of force?
It's not, there's not a force at the center of the universe, is that what you're asking?
Yeah.
There is no known like energy coming from there as far as like pushing things from out there. It would more appear that things originated from a specific place in the
It's
universe.
the side of the Big Bang, right?
The side of the Big Bang, yeah, that's what we're getting to actually.
Yeah.
The Big Bang, and most people would be surprised to hear maybe, is that I would argue it supports Christianity more than it goes against it. Which actually a lot of scientists have tried to move away from the Big Bang because they feel like it actually does lead more towards Christianity and religious views.
I like that
And it
one.
was also created by a German Catholic priest,
Well, there you go.
Fantastic.
which is another reason I'm like, no, we don't like this one.
Right.
Is there a theory about how like the universe is gonna like keep expanding till one moment it's gonna like do like a reverse Big
Yeah.
Bang and collapse and everything's gonna be destroyed or something?
Like a black hole.
I feel
Yeah.
like
Well,
I
so-
heard something about
No,
that.
yeah.
like, over-
They taught that in public school to
Yeah.
me. When I was in middle school, they said there's this theory that it's exactly what you're describing. We're in the expansion phase right now.
Yeah.
And there's a point where after we reach a certain threshold, the universe then becomes shrinking. And then once all the planets, all the astral bodies are all crammed into a singularity point, and then the Big Bang happens, and the next universe is created. It's a theory. So, I mean, there's evidence to support, obviously, there's a Big Bang, there's things moving apart, and there's space stats you can find in different parts of the planet, like how Pangea split apart, and there's velociraptors in Australia and in North America. You know, there's a way to evidence the Big Bang, but there's no evidence saying the universe is going to contract at any point, right? And that just, there's
Yeah.
no...
Well,
That's
it's
all
the problem. The
speculation.
reason why it's puzzling is because the reason why it's expanding is because space is expanding.
Exactly.
No one knows why. So then why in the world would space come back? We don't know.
There's no precedent for
Isn't it
that.
also not slowing down in its rate of expansion?
yeah,
It's
the
so-
rate of expansion.
That's the
Oh, I didn't know that either.
Yeah.
It's
accelerating.
getting even, like,
So-
this is not like a static, oh, it's growing, it's getting faster as it grows.
It's not
So-
tapering off.
So
Wow.
one of the possible futures of the end of the universe is that eventually the expansion rate is so fast between space that all atoms rip apart because the space between the space between those atoms is expanding so fast that they can no longer have any like nuclear bonds or anything.
Yeah.
So yeah, so that's one of the possible ends of
exciting.
the universe.
Don't worry, it's billions
As,
of years out.
as science currently theorizes is possible, the most likely one I would say is just the heat death of the universe.
Yeah.
Right? Where,
That's the other one.
There's actually more weirder ones where they believe that there's there's a multiverse, and those multiverses all move around and bump into each other. And when that happens, different
More
universes, different universes can have different laws of physics with different constances and randomly, spontaneously create stuff.
That's really exciting. There's no precedent for that. What were you saying?
But like, so right now, is the space between atoms expanding?
It depends on who you ask.
yeah, that one.
Yeah.
It's
Yes,
faster.
me.
The expansion of the universe is faster than the speed of light because it's not light that's like because information can't travel faster than the speed of light, so you can't throw like a ball that fast.
Yeah.
But space can move faster than the speed of light. So that's why like you can't see like past a certain amount of like stars. The universe is expanding so fast that the light from those galaxies can't reach us, essentially.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we're glossing over a lot.
Yeah, I
But
don't
on
wanna like
bar,
slow
yeah.
us down.
Yeah, no, it's okay. These are actually like
Science
really
class.
good questions because like at least for me, like this whole argument like was some of the stuff that like I personally struggled in my own faith because it's like, okay, here's all this scientific evidence of other things, but the Bible, which I want to believe is 100% true, right, says it happened a different way. How do I reconcile that, right? So that was one of my big struggles as a Christian growing up.
Yeah.
So.
Sure. Again, this is my big struggle too, is just, does the science even line up at all with Christianity, and like, how can we logically work our way through this? And so, really, like, I would argue the steady state theory is dead as far as intellectual people who are in the science world would argue. It may exist in popular science. I hesitate to say popular, more like lay people might argue it for it, but really.
Peasants.
Wow.
We don't know what you're trying to say. Don't get a sugarcoat it.
Everybody that's not Neil deGrasse Tyson?
Yeah, but really in the scientific world, it is not alive at all. This one has a little bit, I guess, more of an argument to it, but again, scientifically speaking, we have no clue what could possibly pull the universe in back on itself, and it has to get even more powerful every day if you think about it, because the universe is, again, what Wilson said, is expanding faster and faster. So this force has to keep getting stronger and stronger to even reverse that. So again, it would be, if you wanted to try and argue for it to go forever, it would be extremely difficult to start even reversing that. It'd be even more difficult, I would argue, because everything would just want to collapse in on itself at that point. Yeah. Any more questions on that one? All right. We may take a break here in a second here. So this is an interesting one. So I'll do my best to explain this one. Stephen Hawking, late great Stephen Hawking, championed the idea that gravity created the universe. It's a very strange concept to me. But basically he was saying that, so he was saying there was gravity existed and vacuums existed before all of matter came into existence. And so he does argue there was a beginning, but he was saying that before space and time, and matter for that, really, gravity somehow existed, which is saying that, basically, where did I put on here? Yeah, quantum vacuums exist, and then saying that the effect preceded its own cause, and saying that gravity preceded matter. Because if you don't have matter, if you don't have any even energy or space and time, you can't possibly have gravity. But he's arguing because there were quantum vacuums, there must have been gravity.
Yeah.
There's really no sound argument for that. It's purely theoretical, and it's extremely hard to defend even that concept on there. But his argument was, again, there's quantum vacuums and there was gravity. These quantum vacuums, I will grant to you that they act strangely at times. That being said, their strange reactions are not something that you can replicate on a large scale. So whatever would happen in those quantum vacuums, you can't necessarily make that happen universally. Does that make sense?
It's funny because from the alternate side, like gravity literally is space and time,
Right.
according to Einstein. So like, it doesn't really make sense why you would say tiny things have some one thing, but then on the large scales, it's something else.
That's why we need great unified theory.
Yeah. Again, the biggest issue I have is saying that gravity could ever exist before space and time.
It's cart before the horse.
Yeah, the cart before the horse. Those
Chicken
simply
before the
cannot
Yeah, that's
exist.
what I'm, and before the chicken.
Yeah.
Really,
Omelet before the breakfast.
it's asking, well, where is this gravity coming from, and like how would it even exist to begin with? But we're not going to get into the whole details on that one. But also, if you think about it, okay, let's say gravity did somehow exist before the Big Bang, and we'll say an argument that we had all of the universe's matter crammed into one thing as big as my backpack here. So basically all of the universe's matter somehow was crammed into this one space and is tightly compacted by gravity. Well, what is going to initiate the creation of the universe at that point?
Right.
You've got, gravity is not going to initiate anything. It always exerts the same force on everybody at the same time. So, as long as you're same ocean level, basically, or sea level, I should say, gravity is always going to exert on you at the same as everyone else. It's not going to change randomly. And so his argument is that, well, something had to initiate, but like what, that sounds like a first mover, really. Gravity is never going to initiate the creation of anything. It's going to be in a steady state and always stay like that until something comes in there and becomes a first mover, in essence. So his logic fails, I would argue, on three different spots. Gravity never existed, or never could exist, without physical time and matter. Again, quantum vacuums are something rather than nothing. So I do want to make a distinction here. A lot of atheist scientists will say, well, nothing existed, but say quantum vacuums are nothing when they do have physical properties. So when I say nothing, I mean the absence of anything. I'm going to make that distinction, whereas atheist scientists don't necessarily mean that. They don't mean the absence of anything. They mean we have quantum vacuums, we have gravity, and things like that. So I would argue they're a little disingenuous, so just know that if you have a conversation with someone who's versed in that, I would define nothingness as nothing is the absence of anything. And so that makes them have to be a little bit more honest about what they're saying. So again, Hawking assumes something and saying that there is gravity, there is quantum vacuums, and somehow something initiated. Which they try to get around that to saying gravity somehow made it happen, but you have to have some sort of initiation there. Gravity is not going to cause anything to happen. It is always going to be the same force, same no matter what. So hopefully that was clear for you guys on that one. Any questions on that? I know we're going kind of fast. Really, he was saying you can go two different ways. You could say there was this one ball of matter that was always there, and then gravity somehow initiated it, or you can say that gravity existed and then somehow created matter just before time, so you couldn't say at one point because there was no time. It just happened all of a sudden. So you get into some weird time and space on that one. It is a little confusing, but hopefully I made it understandable. Let's go ahead and take a break here real quick for a couple minutes. If you need to use the restroom or if you want to get a drink of water.